Welcome to the peaceful space of sleep-friendly science, where we drift back in time to witness the quiet, green beginnings of life on a world untouched and waiting. Imagine an Earth without the buzz of insects or the rustle of leaves in the wind. Tonight, we explore that silent planet, uncovering how simple mosses and brave, primitive creatures began their cautious journey from the oceans, transforming a rocky landscape into the living world we know. Now settle in, take a deep breath, and let the soft sounds guide you as we begin tonight's journey into the unknown. Section 1. The Lonely Canvas. Come, drift back with me. Further and further beyond the reach of written histories, beyond the faintest human memory, beyond even the age of the great dinosaurs. Let your mind float on the slow, deep river of time back to an Earth you would not recognize. 470 million years ago. Here, in this ancient moment, the world is a masterpiece of silence. There are no sounds you know. Listen closely. There is no bird song to greet the dawn, no hum of insects in the warm air. There is no rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze, for there are no leaves. There is no soft padding of feet on a forest floor, for there is no forest. The world is holding its breath, and it has been holding it for an eternity. Let your senses adjust to this profound emptiness. The air itself feels different. It is thin with a strange metallic scent, and it carries a different balance of gases. But the most striking thing is the light. The sun, our familiar star, is a younger, more ferocious being. Its light is not the soft, golden glow that filters through our modern atmosphere. It is a brilliant, unfiltered, almost violet-white glare. The ozone layer, that gentle, protective veil that shields our world, is still a fragile, developing thing. So, this light pours down with a searing intensity, a raw, untamed energy that sterilizes everything it touches. It is the light of creation, but also the light of immense, desolate power. Imagine yourself standing on the shore of one of this world's first great continents. The land under your feet is not soil. It is not rich, dark earth teeming with hidden life. It is rock, raw, naked, and ancient. It stretches away from you in every direction, an endless, undulating canvas of stone. Great shields of granite, polished smooth by eons of wind. Jagged peaks of basalt, black and sharp against the pale sky. Plains of shattered rock and gravel stretching to a horizon that shimmers in the heat. The colors are not the greens and browns of life, but the stark palette of geology itself. The deep, brooding reds of iron oxides bleeding like rust from the stone. The pale, ghostly whites of quartz and feldspar. The somber grays and blacks of volcanic rock. It is a world painted in minerals, a planet-sized sculpture garden, beautiful in its sheer, stark geometry, but utterly devoid of softness. The only movement here is the work of the elements. The wind is the land's only sculptor, its only voice. It is a lonely, hollow sound, a mournful song that carries for hundreds, thousands of miles without obstacle. It picks up fine grains of rock and dust, a constant, abrasive whisper that scours the mountains and carves the plains. This is not a breeze that playfully lifts a leaf. It is a force of erosion, a river of air flowing over a river of stone. And when the rain comes, it is an event of profound violence. With no plants to soften its impact, no roots to hold the land together, the water falls directly onto the barren rock. The downpours are torrential, acidic, washing the thin atmosphere. They gather in flash floods, carving deep, temporary canyon swaths and arroyos that scar the landscape. These rivers are not clear and sparkling. They are milky, choked with rock flour, a gray or reddish slurry of suspended sediment. They are arteries of grit, carrying the very substance of the continents, grain by grain, down to the great sea. Ah, the sea! Here, and only here, is where the story of life has been unfolding. Look out from the sterile shore past the barren tidal flats where the water washes over lifeless sand and stone. Look out to the vast, shimmering expanse of the global ocean. This is the Panthalassic Ocean, a single, world-spanning body of water. And unlike the silent land, this ocean is a humming, breathing, living thing. It is the cradle, the womb of all existence. Below its surface, protected from the sun's harshest rays, life has been furiously, wonderfully experimenting for hundreds of millions of years. You cannot see it from the shore, but you can feel its presence. This is the world of the Cambrian explosion's strange aftermath. A world of trilobites, armored and scuttling across the seabed, of strange, flower-like crinoids waving gently in the currents, of giant, shelled nautiloids hunting in the gloom, an entire kingdom of complex, alien creatures, living and dying in a world of water. The ocean is a great, green-blue heart, pumping with life, while the continents lie around it like a vast, sleeping body. The land is a promise. It is an empty stage, a silent kingdom waiting for its queen. It offers something the crowded, competitive ocean cannot: space, unclaimed territory on a planetary scale. But it is a dangerous and formidable frontier. To leave the water is to leave behind the very source of life. It is to abandon the gentle, stable medium that has nurtured every living cell since the very beginning. Out here on the land, there is no water to be found, except for the fleeting, violent rains. There is no food. There is no shelter. There is only rock, wind, and that relentless, searing sun. Any living thing that dares to venture here would be desiccated, starved, and irradiated in moments. It is a challenge of almost unimaginable difficulty, a leap of faith into a beautiful but lethal void. And yet the invitation is there, in the thin film of moisture left by the retreating tide, in the quiet, freshwater pools and streams that wind their way down from the highlands. The boundary between the world of water and the world of rock is not a sharp line, but a zone of transition, a damp, shimmering edge of possibility. It is here, in this liminal space, this ancient shoreline, that the greatest invasion in the history of our planet is about to begin. It will not be a charge of armies or a clash of kings. It will be a silent, slow, and cautious creep, a whisper of green at the water's edge, the first tentative touch of life upon the lonely canvas of the continents. For now, just rest in this immense quiet. Feel the starkness of the landscape, the raw power of the elements. The world is a blank page, holding its potential in a deep and profound stillness. The sun beats down, the wind sighs over the stone, and in the ocean a revolution is brewing, a patient, green ambition gathering its strength to make the impossible leap. The first explorers are coming. Section 2. The Green Whisper on the Shore. Let your mind rest there, on that ancient, silent shoreline where the living ocean kisses the dead stone. The boundary is sharp, a clear division between two worlds. But now draw your focus closer. Zoom in past the scale of mountains and continents to the scale of a single, water-polished pebble at the edge of a freshwater stream trickling towards the great sea. Here, in the dampness, a miracle is happening. A revolution in the color green. It begins not as a plant, not as a moss, but as something far humbler. Imagine a thin, slick film of green algae, the descendants of those thriving in the shallow, sunlit waters. For millions of years, they have lived a life entirely submerged, bathed in the constant, gentle support of water. But the world is not static. Tides ebb and flow. Streams shrink in the dry seasons and swell in the wet. And in these fluctuations, some of these algal films found themselves, for brief moments, left behind. Exposed. The first sensation would have been a shock. The sudden weight of their own microscopic bodies, no longer supported by buoyancy. And then the assault of the air and the sun. The unfiltered light, a thing of terror. The dryness, a slow, creeping death that pulls the very water from their cells. Most perished. For eons, this was the fate of any life that strayed too far from the aquatic womb. A brief, fatal stranding on the shores of a hostile world. But life is the most patient of innovators. Within the immense genetic library of these algae, tiny, random changes were occurring. One change, perhaps, produced a slightly tougher cell wall. Another, a compound that could shield ever so slightly against the harsh ultraviolet rays. These were not conscious decisions, they were fortunate accidents tested by the unforgiving reality of the shoreline. The survivors were the ones that happened to possess these tiny advantages. They clung to life in the splash zones, in the perpetually damp crevices of rocks on the muddy banks of primordial rivers. They were the first pioneers, and their existence was a constant, desperate balancing act. They were still creatures of the water, but they were learning to endure the air. Imagine them now, a green stain on the wet rock. They are not conquering anything. They are simply surviving. They are a living membrane, a whisper of green pressed against the stone, drawing moisture from the rock's pores, from the morning dew, from the memory of the last rain. They are the very definition of tenacity. This was a world of green edges. Green lines tracing the contours of rivers and lakes. Green patches coloring the tidal flats. But the vast interior of the continents remained as barren as a moonscape. How could this thin, fragile film of life ever hope to penetrate that great, dry emptiness? The answer came in another evolutionary masterpiece, the spore. Think of a spore not as a seed, but as a message in a bottle cast into the ocean of time and air. These pioneering plants, the ancestors of our modern mosses and liverworts, developed a new strategy. When conditions were good, when water was plentiful, they would grow and spread their green film. But when faced with the stress of drying out, they channeled their remaining life force into creating something extraordinary. They packaged their genetic essence into a microscopic vessel, a tiny, self-contained lifeboat. This vessel, this spore, was a marvel of biological engineering. Its core held the complete instructions for life. But around this core, the plant built a wall. A wall made of one of the most resilient organic substances to ever evolve, sporopollenin. It is a waxy, incredibly tough polymer. It is resistant to drying, to chemical attack, to decay, and, crucially, to the searing ultraviolet radiation of the ancient sun. Sporopollenin was the armor that life needed to leave the water behind. Now picture a gentle breeze, that same lonely wind that once carried only dust across the continents. Now it picks up something new. It lifts these microscopic spores from their parent film and carries them aloft. They are impossibly light, motes of dust that are secretly ships of life. They drift for miles on the currents of the air, crossing barren plains and rocky hills where no water could ever linger. Most of these spores would land on dry, inhospitable rock and simply wait. They could remain dormant for years, decades, perhaps even longer, sealed within their protective coats, tiny packages of potential, sleeping through the long, dry ages. They were a patient wager against impossible odds. But every so often, one of these traveling spores would land in a place that was, for a moment, hospitable. A shaded crack in a rock where rainwater collected. A small depression that held the morning dew just a little longer. And there, triggered by the faintest touch of moisture, the spore would awaken. It would break open its protective shell, and the life within would begin to grow. A new green stain would appear, miles from any permanent body of water. A lonely outpost of life in the heart of the stone desert. This was the silent invasion. Not a march, but a dispersal. A slow, incremental spreading, carried on the wind, particle by particle. And as these outposts of life grew, they themselves changed. They evolved from simple algal films into something with a little more structure, a little more ambition. They became the first bryophytes, the first liverworts and mosses. Imagine these first mosses. They are not the lush, deep cushions you might find in a modern forest. They are simpler, flatter, more sprawling. They hug the ground, creating a thin, velvety skin over the rock. They have no true roots to seek out water deep in the ground. Instead, they have rhizoids, simple filaments that act as anchors clinging to the surface of the stone. They are still utterly dependent on surface water. They live their lives like a sponge, soaking up rain and dew, and then slowly, patiently enduring the dry spells that inevitably follow. Their life is a beautiful, two-part story. When wet, they are a vibrant green carpet, absorbing sunlight, performing the quiet magic of photosynthesis. In this state, they live out their lives, and when the time is right for reproduction, they need a film of water for their swimming sperm to find an egg. They are still tied to their aquatic ancestry, still celebrating their union in the medium of water. But from this union comes the second part of their story. A slender, alien-looking stalk grows up from the green carpet. This is the sporophyte, a generation dedicated to a single purpose: creating and releasing the next wave of spores. It rises just a few millimeters into the air, a tiny tower reaching for the sky. At its tip, a capsule forms, a small casket where millions of new spores are meticulously crafted, each one coated in that miraculous, protective sporopollenin. And when the stalk dries, the capsule bursts, releasing its precious cargo to the wind. A silent, green explosion of hope. So the cycle continues. The wind carries the spores. A few lucky ones land in a damp spot. A new patch of green velvet appears. It lives, it reproduces in the water film, and it sends up its tiny stalks to cast the next generation even further. Inch by inch, century by century, millennium by millennium, the green whisper on the shore is becoming a persistent rumor, spreading across the silent, waiting face of the continents. These humble, ground-hugging plants, without roots, without flowers, without seeds, were the true conquerors. They were painting the world green, not with force, but with the quiet, unyielding power of patience. They were not just living on the land. They were beginning a process that would change its very nature, forever. Section 3. The Weavers of the First Soil. Feel, in your mind's eye, that thin, green velvet you have just imagined spreading across the stone. Rest your attention upon it. It seems so fragile, a mere stain of life on an immense and indifferent geology. It is easy to think of the rock as the permanent reality, and the moss as a temporary guest. But this is a profound misunderstanding. In this quiet, patient relationship, it is the moss that holds all the power. It is the living film that will dismantle the mountain. These first plants were not just surviving on the land. They were engaging in a slow, deliberate act of alchemy. They were the weavers of the first soil, the patient architects of a living earth. And their first tool was their own breath. As these mosses and liverworts performed the quiet miracle of photosynthesis, turning sunlight into life, they also respired. They breathed. And with every exhalation, they released carbon dioxide. When this carbon dioxide mixed with the water, the rain, the dew, the film of moisture they so desperately clung to, it formed a weak solution of carbonic acid. It was a gentle acid, nothing violent or dramatic. Think of it as an acidic whisper, a constant, corrosive breath against the surface of the stone. For 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years, this soft, acidic breath washed over the feldspar, the mica, the granite. And slowly, patiently, it began to dissolve the bonds that held the rock together. The acid leached away soluble minerals like potassium and calcium, essential nutrients that the plants could then absorb through their surfaces. The unyielding surface of the planet was being chemically persuaded to give up its substance. But there was a physical persuasion as well. Look closer at the rhizoids, those simple, hair-like filaments anchoring the moss to the rock. They were not true roots, but they had a subtle strength. They sought out the most microscopic of cracks, the faintest imperfections in the stone's surface. They would insinuate themselves into these tiny fissures, and as they became wet, they would swell slightly. When they dried, they would shrink. This cycle of imperceptible expansion and contraction, repeated millions upon millions of times by a carpet of countless rhizoids, acted like 1,000,000 tiny wedges, to put an unbearable, patient stress on the rock. Grain by grain, flake by flake, the solid stone was being prized apart. Now you are witnessing the birth of sand and clay, not through the brute force of wind and water, but through the quiet, persistent chemistry and physics of life itself. The first great gift of these plants was the unmaking of the rock, but their second gift was even more profound. It was the gift of their own death. Each of these humble mosses had a lifespan, and when it died, its tiny body did not just blow away. It remained trapped in the tangled mat of its living brethren. And here, a new ingredient was added to the world. For the first time on the barren continents, shattered rock dust was being mixed with organic matter. The complex, carbon-rich molecules that the plant had built out of sunlight and air were being returned to the land. Imagine this new substance. It is not yet soil as we know it. It is a thin, gritty, dark paste, a biological crust clinging to the rock face. But it is a substance with magical properties. Unlike pure rock dust, which lets water run straight off, this organic-rich mixture is absorbent. It is a sponge, can now hold onto the rainwater for longer. It creates a reservoir of moisture, a damp, dark haven that can sustain the living mosses through longer and longer dry periods. And this new crust did more than hold water. As the dead plants decayed, they released the nutrients they had painstakingly extracted from the rock and the air. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, the very building blocks of life were now held in this thin, developing layer, ready to be used by the next generation. A bank account of vitality was being established on the surface of the barren land. This created a powerful feedback loop, a cycle of accelerating creation. More moss could grow on this slightly more hospitable surface. As more moss grew, it could break down more rock and contribute more of its body when it died. This, in turn, created a thicker, richer, more water-retentive layer, which in turn could support an even denser carpet of moss. The weavers were not just making soil, they were making a home that was ever more welcoming for themselves. And they were not alone in this grand project for long. This new resource, this layer of dead organic matter, was a feast waiting for its diners. And so, other microscopic life forms, which had perhaps been dormant or leading a precarious existence, now bloomed. Bacteria and fungi, the great decomposers, began to thrive in this new proto-soil. Picture them as the invisible partners of the mosses. If the mosses were the architects, the bacteria and fungi were the demolition and recycling crews. They possessed powerful enzymes that could break down the tough cellulose and lignin of the dead plant matter, something the mosses themselves could not do. They were the gut of this new, terrestrial ecosystem. They consumed the dead, and in doing so, they broke down the complex organic molecules into simple, inorganic nutrients that the living plants could easily absorb. They were closing the loop. Life, death, decay, and rebirth. This fundamental cycle of all living ecosystems was happening for the first time on land, in a dark, damp film no thicker than a piece of paper spread across a rock. Now zoom out again. See this process not on a single stone, but on a global scale. On every continent, on every rock face touched by rain, this slow, silent process is unfolding. The greening of the planet is also the darkening of its surface. A thin, living, breathing skin is forming over the planet's sterile bones. This had consequences that rippled out across the entire world. As these vast new carpets of green life drew down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, the very composition of the air began to change. The oxygen levels, which had been slowly rising due to oceanic life, were given a major new boost. The planet was becoming more breathable, and the climate itself felt the touch of these humble plants. By drawing down the greenhouse gas CO2, these first land plants began to cool the planet. This slow, green conquest may have contributed to a period of global cooling, a testament to how even the smallest of organisms in great enough numbers can become a planetary force. The rivers, too, were being tamed. Those violent, gritty flash floods that scoured the land were now being gentled. The new, spongy soil held the rainwater, releasing it slowly and steadily. The water running into the streams was clearer, less choked with sediment. The land was learning to hold its water, and with it, hold its ground. The silent, empty continents were being prepared. A stage was being set. The rock was being turned into a cradle. The air was being filled with life-giving oxygen. A foundation was being laid, a soft, dark, and fertile blanket ready for the next, more complex, more ambitious wave of life that was waiting in the wings. The world was being made ready for roots. Section 4. reaching for the ancient sun. The world now has its skin, a living, breathing sheath of green and dark, damp protosoil. The weavers have done their work well, anchoring life to the land, taming the rock and the rain. But they had painted the world in only two dimensions. Theirs was a horizontal existence, a life spent pressed against the surface. The mosses, for all their pioneering bravery, were still slaves to the film of water, forever looking up at a sky they could not reach. But life is ambition. It is an endless reaching, a restless desire to fill every possible space. And the greatest, most unclaimed space on this new green land was the air itself. The vertical dimension. The challenge was immense, a problem of physics and biology entwined. How does a soft, water-filled organism stand up against the relentless pull of gravity? And how does it lift the water it needs from the damp ground up into the dry, sun-drenched air? To leave the surface was to risk dying of thirst in the sky. The answer, when it came, was one of the most profound innovations in the history of the planet. It was the invention of plumbing. A revolution that took place not on the outside, but on the inside. It was the evolution of the vascular system. Imagine, deep within the body of a slightly more adventurous green pioneer, the first specialized cells began to form. They were not just for storage or for photosynthesis. They were for transport. They began to link together end to end, forming the faintest of channels. Hollow tubes, infinitesimally thin. Two systems evolved in parallel, a beautiful and efficient duality. The first was the xylem. Think of it as a bundle of microscopic, reinforced straws dedicated to a one-way journey upwards. Its job was to pull water from the ground, but a simple straw would collapse under the plant's own weight. So, life created a new substance, a molecule of incredible strength and rigidity. Lignin. Lignin is the stuff of wood. It is the architect of verticality. It is a complex polymer that infiltrates the cell walls of the xylem, reinforcing them, making them both waterproof and strong. It is the plant's internal skeleton. With lignin, the xylem tubes became more than just straws. They became structural columns. They could support weight. They could resist gravity. For the first time, a plant could build itself upwards. Alongside this water pipeline, another system formed, the phloem. If the xylem was the water main, the phloem was the pantry delivery service. It was a network of living cells designed to carry the precious sugar, the food created by photosynthesis in the sunlit parts of the plant, down to the parts that lived in darkness. It was a river of energy flowing from the factory to the rest of the organism, feeding the parts that were now venturing into the ground. With this internal plumbing, this skeleton of water and wood, the plant was no longer a simple sponge. It was a dynamic, integrated system. It had solved the problem of height. Picture the first of these new beings. We know them from the fossil record. A plant called Cooksonia. It was incredibly simple, a ghost of a plant by today's standards. It had no leaves. It had no flowers. It was just a thin, green, naked stem that rose a few inches from the ground and then forked. And forked again. Like a series of choices, a series of upward gestures. At the very tip of each tiny branch was a small capsule, a sporangium holding the spores for the next generation. Cooksonia was a statement of intent. It was life standing up. It was lifting its reproductive organs away from the wet ground, up into the air, allowing the wind to carry its children further and more effectively than ever before. It was a tiny green skyscraper in a world of flat dwellers. And once the secret of height was unlocked, a silent, slow-motion race to the sky began. This internal plumbing allowed for the evolution of the three great structures that define the plants we know today: true roots, stems, and leaves. The rhizoids of the mosses were mere anchors. But now, with the ability to transport water and sugars over long distances, the lower half of the plant could embark on a new kind of exploration. It began to burrow, to journey downwards into the new, dark soil, actively seeking out pockets of water and minerals. These were the first true roots. Imagine them, pale and questing, the hidden other half of the plant. They became the miners, the explorers of the terrestrial underworld, delving deeper, splitting pebbles, and in doing so, dramatically accelerating the creation of deeper, richer soil. They were the plant's purchase on the world. The stem, fortified with more and more lignin, became the great central highway, the trunk, the support that lifted the most important parts of the plant into the light. And on these stems, something new began to unfurl. The first leaves. They probably started as simple, flat outgrowths, small green scales on the side of the stem, increasing the surface area for photosynthesis just a little. But as the competition for sunlight grew more intense, these scales expanded, becoming broad, intricate, beautiful solar collectors. And on the surface of these leaves, another marvel of engineering appeared: stomata, microscopic pores like a million tiny mouths that the plant could open and close. This gave it exquisite control. It could open them to breathe in the carbon dioxide it needed, and then close them tightly when the air grew too dry to prevent its precious water from escaping. The plant was no longer passively enduring its environment. It was actively managing its relationship with the air. Now, the world truly begins to change. The landscape is no longer a simple green carpet. Thickets of these early vascular plants, like the lycophytes, the ancient club mosses, begin to rise. They are not yet great trees, but they are dense, bushy, and several feet tall. For the very first time in the history of the continents, life is creating structure. It is creating complexity. And with this new three-dimensional structure, a new phenomenon is born: the shadow. Before this moment, the world knew only two states: the brilliant, direct glare of the sun, and the stark, deep blackness behind a rock. There was no subtlety. But now, as these primitive thickets rise, they cast a dapple of shade upon the ground. A cool, moist, and sheltered space is created beneath them. A microclimate, a new kind of place to be. This shaded, humid world beneath the canopy of the first upright plants is a refuge from the harshness of the sun and the dryness of the air. The plants are no longer just colonizing the world. They are engineering it. They are building habitats. Their powerful roots are plowing the earth, creating deep, aerated, nutrient-rich soil at a pace the mosses could only have dreamed of. Their mass of leaves is pumping out oxygen on an industrial scale, further transforming the atmosphere. They are creating a world of layers: the bright, hot canopy, the dim, humid understory, the dark, mysterious soil. A new architecture of life was in place, and its shaded, humid corridors, its layers of opportunity, were an open invitation. The stage was set, the table was laid with a feast of green life, and shelter was now provided. All that was missing were the actors to inhabit it. From the water, something was watching. Something with many legs was about to take the same momentous step that the plants had taken, venturing out of the familiar water and into the strange, new vertical world of green. Section 5: The First Cautious Footsteps. The new world of green is waiting. Its cool, shaded corridors, woven from the first upright stems and thickened soil, are an invitation, a haven. And from the edge of the freshwater streams, from the shallow brackish pools, this invitation has been received. Life in the water has always been a paradox of safety and peril. The water supports, it feeds, it protects from the harsh sun, but it is also crowded. It is a world of relentless hunters and desperate prey. The land, for all its dangers, offers a tantalizing possibility: escape. But for an animal, the challenges are different, more acute than they were for the plants. An animal must move. It must seek out its food. And it must do so while carrying the full weight of its body, a weight that was, until this moment, lifted and cradled by the water. To crawl ashore is to feel the crushing reality of gravity for the first time. And an animal's soft body, evolved for an aquatic life, would dry out in the open air in a matter of minutes. So, who could possibly be the first to answer the call? Who had the right equipment for this suicidal-seeming journey? The answer lay with a group of creatures already ancient and successful. The arthropods. They were the masters of the Paleozoic seas, the trilobites, the sea scorpions, and they possessed a secret weapon, a gift from their evolutionary past that would, by a fortunate coincidence, become their passport to the future. The exoskeleton. Think of it as a suit of armor, custom-fitted and complete. A skeleton on the outside. This tough, chitinous shell was not evolved for the land. It was a defense against predators in the brutal oceanic food web. But it just so happened to provide perfect solutions to the problems of terrestrial life. It provided structural support, a rigid framework to hold the body up against the pull of gravity. It was also largely waterproof, a personal containment field against the lethal dryness of the air. It was a knight's armor, a deep-sea submersible, and a walker frame, all in one. Now, imagine one of these first pioneers, perhaps a creature akin to a millipede or an early relative of a scorpion. It lives in the shallows, scuttling between algae-covered rocks. For generations, its world has been defined by the feeling of water pressure, the taste of chemicals on the current. Today, it pushes a little further. It crawls up the muddy bank of a stream, and for the first time, its head emerges from the water. The sensation must have been an overwhelming shock. The world, once a blurry, blue-green place of gentle pressure, is now a riot of sharp, intense stimuli. The light is blinding. The air feels impossibly thin, a strange and empty void. Gravity takes hold, a heavy, unfamiliar cloak. The creature's own body, once so light, is now a burden, and its senses are rewired. The chemical tastes of the water are replaced by a new, more subtle sense. Smell. The scent of damp decay, of the new soil of the green plants. Vibrations travel not through water, but through the solid ground, felt by its many legs. It is a terrifying, alien world. The first instinct is to retreat, to slide back into the familiar comfort of the water. And for millions of years, that is what most of them did. A brief foray, a panic scramble back to safety. But the lure of the land is persistent. The shaded, damp places beneath the Cooksonia thickets are so close. And they smell of food. Not living food, not yet. But something even more accessible. They smell of the dead. The shed leaves, the fallen stems, the rich organic matter that the new plants and their bacterial partners are creating. A feast for any creature that could learn to eat it. And so they came, not with a heroic charge, but with a slow, cautious creeping. The first footsteps on the true land were not those of a mighty predator, but of a humble janitor. The detritivore, creatures like the first millipedes, slow-moving, armored tubes with a river of legs. They were not brave. They did not need to be. Their journey was not one of miles, but of inches. From the safety of the water's edge to the damp soil right beside it. Picture them now, these first land walkers in the Silurian and early Devonian periods. They are creatures of the underworld. They live within the new, spongy soil the plants have made. They are the first burrowers, moving through the damp darkness, their many legs churning the soil, their simple mouths munching on the half-decayed plant debris. They are almost never in the open air. They live in a world that is still mostly water, the water held captive by the soil. They are land animals that have brought a bubble of the aquatic environment with them. In their humble, hidden way, they are profoundly important. They are the next step in the great cycle of decomposition. They are chewing up the dead plants, breaking them down physically, aerating the soil, mixing the layers. They are the gut of the land, partners to the fungi and bacteria, accelerating the creation of a deep, rich, and stable earth. and their presence, this new source of moving, protein-rich food, was an invitation of its own. Where there are grazers, or in this case, decomposers, predators will inevitably follow. Now, imagine another creature emerging from the water's edge. This one is different, more alert, more purposeful. It is an early arachnid, a pioneer scorpion. It too has the exoskeleton, the armor needed to survive. But it has brought other tools with it. Pincers for grasping, a tail tipped with a venomous sting, and a predator's patience. Two stays in the damp, dark places. It hides under a piece of half-buried plant stem or a loose flake of rock. And it waits. It feels the world through the vibrations in the soil, a faint tremor that signals the slow approach of a scuttling millipede. Then a sudden, swift attack. The first act of predation on land. A silent, hidden drama, played out in the humid darkness beneath the green canopy. These first animals had to solve one more great problem. Breathing. Gills, those delicate, feathery structures designed to extract dissolved oxygen from water, are useless in the air. They would collapse and dry out in seconds. So life innovated again. The arthropods developed two new solutions. Some, like the ancestors of insects, developed a network of tiny, reinforced tubes called tracheae that led from small openings on their body directly to their tissues, delivering air passively. Others, like the scorpions and spiders, developed book lungs, delicate, leaf-like structures stacked together in an internal, air-filled cavity, keeping them moist while allowing oxygen to diffuse into their bodies. They were carrying a small, private piece of the ocean inside them, a lungful of humid air. The silent invasion now has the soundtrack. It is not a roar or a cry. It is a soft, subtle set of noises. Listen. It is the faint, almost inaudible scuttling of hundreds of tiny legs on damp earth. It is the soft click of chitinous armor against a pebble. It is the gentle, persistent chewing of the first detritivores, processing a fallen world. The continents are no longer just green. They are alive with movement. A hidden kingdom has established itself on the forest floor, a complex web of life and death unfolding in the shadows. The plants built the house, and now the first tenants have moved into the cellar. They have occupied the ground floor, but the house has many other rooms. The tall, sturdy stems, the broad leaves, the canopy reaching for the sun, this whole vertical world is still an empty frontier, waiting for creatures that could climb, and perhaps, one day, even fly. Section 6. The making of the first forests. The world has found its footing. The plants have learned to stand tall, and the first crawling, scuttling animals now patrol the damp, dark earth beneath them. But life's ambition, its relentless drive towards complexity, was just beginning. The small, scattered thickets of Cooksonia and their cousins were a mere preface. The planet was now poised for an act of creation on a scale it had never seen before on land. It was ready to build its first forests. Let your mind drift forward in time, into the heart of the Devonian period, the age of fishes, but an age that could just as easily be called the age of trees. The evolutionary toolkit was now complete. Vascular tissue provided the plumbing and the strength. Roots provided the anchor and the means to mine the soil. Leaves provided the solar panels. Now it was simply a matter of scale, a matter of combining these elements into new and more magnificent forms. Imagine the landscape beginning to change. The low-lying, bushy lycophytes start to reach higher. Competition for sunlight is the great engine of this change. Any plant that could lift its leaves just a little higher than its neighbor gained a monumental advantage. This created an evolutionary arms race, a silent, slow-motion battle fought over centuries, not with weapons, but with lignin and cellulose. The result was the tree. Picture one of these first true trees, a creature like Archaeopteryx. Do not confuse it with the bird of a similar name. This was all plant. It is a revelation, a structure of profound grace and power. It has a thick, woody trunk, a massive column of lignin-reinforced xylem, soaring upwards 50, 60, perhaps even 80 feet into the sky. This is not a tentative stem. It is a declaration of permanence, a pillar connecting the earth and the heavens. From this trunk, great branches spread out, not in the simple forking pattern of Cooksonia, but in a complex, hierarchical arrangement designed to maximize the capture of light. And on these branches are the leaves. But these are not simple scales. They are feathery, fern-like fronds, delicate and intricate, casting a deep and complex shade below. They are arranged in beautiful spirals around the branches, a perfect solution to the problem of not shading out the leaves below them. For the first time, the planet has a true canopy, a vast, interlocking ceiling of green. Stand in your imagination at the foot of this Archaeopteris tree. The air here is different. It is thick, humid, and still. The direct, harsh light of the sun is gone, replaced by a soft, emerald twilight that filters down through the layers of fronds. The ground is a deep, soft carpet of shed leaves, a constantly accumulating layer of organic wealth. The sound is different, too. The lonely howl of the wind is broken, transformed into a gentle, sibilant whisper as it moves through a million tiny leaves. This is not just a collection of plants. This is an environment, a world within a world. And Archaeopteris was not alone. It was joined by other giants. The lycophytes, those humble club mosses, evolved into colossal versions of themselves, the lepidodendrales or scale trees. Their trunks were not woody in the same way, but were covered in a beautiful diamond-patterned bark left by shed leaves, reaching over 100 feet tall. There were the giant horsetails, the calamites, whose ridged, bamboo-like trunks formed dense, impenetrable thickets in the swamps. A mosaic of different forests now spreads across the continents. In the wetter lowlands, vast, swampy jungles of calamites and scale trees. On the better-drained uplands, the more advanced Archaeopteris forests rise, with their modern-looking wood and deep root systems. These forests were engines of planetary change on a scale that dwarfs what came before. Their collective thirst was immense. The constant pulling of water through their roots, up their trunks, and its release through the stomata of their leaves, a process called transpiration, was like a great, green fountain. They were pumping colossal amounts of water vapor into the atmosphere. They were making their own weather, creating more humidity, more cloud cover, and more rain. The water cycle, once a simple affair of oceanic evaporation and continental downpour, was now deeply entangled with the biology of the forests. And their roots, their powerful questing roots, were doing more than just anchoring them. The roots of a tree like Archaeopteris were a revelation. They were strong, woody, and capable of penetrating deep into the broken bedrock. They were biological jackhammers, shattering rock, and their constant cycle of growth and decay created deep channels in the earth. As they died, these massive root systems left behind a legacy of carbon and pathways for water. They were transforming the thin skin of protosoil into deep, complex, layered soils, capable of holding vast amounts of water and nutrients. They were creating the very foundation of all future terrestrial ecosystems. But these first forests were also deeply alien, strange. The decay cycle was not yet in balance. The plants had evolved tough, resistant lignin and cellulose to build their massive bodies, but the decomposers, bacteria and fungi, had not yet fully caught up. They did not yet possess all the enzymes needed to efficiently break down this new, tough material called wood. So, when these giant trees fell, they did not rot away in the same way they would today. They simply lay there, piling up generation after generation. In the great swamp forests, they fell into the stagnant, oxygen-poor water and were buried under layers of sediment. Instead of their carbon being released back into the atmosphere by decay, it was being sequestered, taken out of the system, buried. This was the beginning of the great Carboniferous coal swamps. The light and energy of the ancient sun, captured by these magnificent trees millions of years ago, was being packed away, compressed, and cooked into the black, energy-rich seams of coal that would one day power a new industrial species. We are, in a very real sense, running our modern world on the bottled sunlight of these first primeval forests. This massive burial of carbon had a dramatic effect. With so much carbon dioxide being pulled from the air and buried, the atmosphere changed profoundly. Oxygen levels, no longer balanced by the respiration of decomposers, began to skyrocket. The air itself was becoming supercharged with this volatile, life-giving gas. The forest floor, too, was now a far more complex place. The deep litter of fallen leaves and wood created an endless variety of niches. A world of tunnels, crevices, humid pockets, and decaying logs. This explosion of habitat complexity was fuel for an explosion of animal diversity. The millipedes, the arachnids, the first primitive insects that had been living simple lives in the soil now found a multi-story city to explore. A world to climb, a world to hide in. The stage was set for them to diversify into an astonishing array of new forms, to conquer the branches and the leaves, and to fill the air with the buzz of the first wings. And in the streams and pools shaded by these new forests, a different kind of revolution was gathering its strength, preparing for its own journey onto the land. Section 7. A lungful of an alien world. Rest now, in the emerald twilight of the Devonian forest. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth, of decay and new life. The only sounds are the whisper of wind in the high fronds and the soft, secret scuttling of the arthropod pioneers in the deep leaf litter. The land has been claimed by green plants and armored crawlers. But the greatest story of this age is still unfolding where it all began. In the water. Peer through the foliage, into the dark, tea-colored water of a floodplain pool. This is not the clear, open water of the ancient ocean. It is a world choked with the debris of the new forests. Sunken logs, shed leaves, and tangled roots create a murky, complex maze. The water itself is often warm, stagnant, and starved of oxygen, its supply consumed by the rampant decay. To breathe here with gills alone is a struggle, and it is a dangerous place. The age of fishes is in full swing. The waters teem with predators, culminating in giants like the armored, blade-jawed Dunkleistus, a creature of terrifying power. The shallows, for all their clutter and low oxygen, offer a kind of refuge. And it is here, in these challenging, marginal worlds, that a new kind of hero is being forged. Look closely. There is a fish here, but it is unlike the others. This is a lobe-finned fish, a creature like Eusthenopteron or its even more famous cousin, Tiktaalik. Its fins are the key. They are not the thin, delicate fans of a typical fish, designed for elegant steering in open water. They are different. They are fleshy, muscular stalks with a strong central line of bones inside them, bones that are startlingly similar to the humerus, radius, and ulna of your own arm. These are not fins for swimming. They are paddles for pushing. They are props for resting on the bottom. In the dense, tangled environment of the forest-choked swamp, these fins allow the fish to punt and shove its way through obstacles that would trap its more graceful relatives. This fish has another secret. It has a primitive lung, a simple air sac connected to its gullet, an inheritance from its ancient ancestors. In the clean, open waters, it was a redundant piece of anatomy. But here, in the oxygen-starved swamps, it is the key to survival. Watch as our fish rises to the surface. It breaks through the brown water, and for a moment, its head is in another world. It opens its mouth and takes a gulp of air. It swallows it, forcing it down into its lung. This is the first breath, a lungful of an alien world. The air of the Devonian is not our air. Thanks to the new forests, it is thick with oxygen, perhaps far more than our own. To this fish, that gulp of air would have been a potent, intoxicating rush, a jolt of pure energy that allowed it to thrive where others struggled. And there is a third miracle. Look at its head. A typical fish has its head fused to its shoulders. To look left or right, it must turn its whole body. But Tiktaalik, the fishapod, has a neck. Its head is free to move independently. It can rest its body on the bottom, propped up on its muscular fins, and turn its head to scan the shallows or to look up out of the water. Combine these gifts, the strong prop-like fins, the life-giving lung, the mobile, watchful neck. These were not adaptations for the land. They were adaptations for life in the increasingly complex, difficult, and opportunity-rich shallows created by the land. The forest was reaching into the water and changing the rules, favoring the strange, the strong, and the resourceful. Now imagine the moment, the pull. What was it? Perhaps it was the scent of the waiting feast. Those millipedes, those scorpion relatives, those new, soft-bodied insect larvae scuttling in the damp soil right at the water's edge. A source of food with no aquatic predators to compete with. Perhaps it was escape, a large predator gliding into the pool, sending our fishapods scrambling into the shallows where the hunter could not follow. Whatever the reason, the movement happens. Using those strong, bony fins, it heaves itself forward. It is not walking. It is a clumsy, laborious belly drag. The full, shocking weight of its own body is a crushing burden. Its moist skin, evolved for the water, immediately begins to feel the strange, pulling dryness of the air. Its eyes, designed for the blurry, refracted light of the water, are now met with the sharp, clear, terrifying reality of the terrestrial world. This is not a conquest. It is a desperate, gasping, awkward raid. A lunge from one world into another. It drags its body across a few inches of mud, perhaps to snatch an unsuspecting arthropod, perhaps just to reach the safety of the next, nearby pool. And then, with a wet, clumsy splash, it returns to the water, its mission complete. Its skin is saved from drying, its body once again embraced by the familiar, buoyant cradle. But the seal has been broken. The journey has been made. And in the great, slow waltz of evolution, those individuals whose fins were a little stronger, whose lungs were a little more efficient, whose bodies could tolerate the air for just a few moments longer, they were the ones who survived. They were the ones who passed on their remarkable gifts. Over millions of years, this lineage of pioneers transformed. The fins, tested by the mud and gravity, slowly, generation by generation, strengthened and reshaped themselves into legs. The fin rays at the tips became stubby, sturdy digits. Toes. The pelvic and pectoral girdles grew stronger to bear more weight. They became the first true amphibians, creatures like ichthyostoga and acanthostoga. Picture them. They are magnificent, transitional beings. They have a fish's tail, a salamander's body, and a powerful, toothy skull. They have strong, if clumsy, legs with 7 or 8 toes on each foot. They are the living bridge between two dynasties. They can walk on the land. They can breathe the air. They can hunt in the deep shade of the calamite and Archaeopteris forests. A new sound joins the forest floor. It is not the dry scuttling of the arthropods. It is the wet slap of a fleshy body on mud, the heavy breathing of a rudimentary lung. Perhaps, in the humid evenings, the first guttural croak echoes across the swamp, a call from one of these new wanderers to another. Yet they are not free. They have made the leap, but a tether still holds them back, an invisible chain to their aquatic past. Their skin is not waterproof. It must remain moist, or they will perish. And most importantly, their children must be born in the water. They still lay soft, gelatinous eggs, like fish spawn, that would shrivel and die in the open air. They are explorers of the land, but they are prisoners of the pond. To truly conquer the continents, to venture into the dry, vast interiors far from any stream or swamp, life would need to solve this one last problem. It would need to find a way to take the ocean with it. Section 8. The Seed and the Shelled Promise. The world is now a place of profound duality. The forests stand tall and green, and the first four-legged vertebrates patrol their humid floors. But life is still tethered to the water. The amphibians, for all their groundbreaking progress, must return to the ponds to lay their vulnerable, jelly-like eggs. The ferns and giant club mosses that form the great forests are equally bound. Their reproduction depends on a film of water for their sperm to swim to the egg. The conquest of the land is incomplete. The vast, dry interiors of the supercontinent Pangaea, far from the coastal swamps and rivers, remain an empty frontier, a world still waiting for life to learn how to break its final chain to the past. The solution, when it arrived, was one of nature's most elegant and revolutionary acts of parallelism. The plants and the animals, facing the same fundamental problem of reproduction in a dry world, independently evolved the same breathtaking answer. They learned how to package an entire aquatic world into a small, portable, and protected vessel. For the plants, it was the seed. For the animals, it was the amniotic egg. First, let us return to the quiet, green world of the plants. In the understory of the great carboniferous forests, a new kind of plant is emerging, a seed fern. It looks like a fern, with the same delicate, feathery fronds, but it holds a secret. It has abandoned the old way of casting spores to the wind and hoping for a wet landing. Instead, it has internalized the most delicate stages of life. Imagine the process. The female part of the plant no longer releases a vulnerable egg into the world. Instead, it holds onto it, protecting it deep within its own tissues. It creates a small, nutrient-rich package around this egg and ovule. This ovule is like a well-stocked nursery, waiting for a visitor. The male part of the plant, meanwhile, packages its genetic material not into a swimming sperm that needs water, but into a tiny, tough, almost weightless grain of pollen. This pollen is a masterpiece of miniaturization, coated in a resilient outer layer, designed for a long and perilous journey through the air. The wind, which once carried spores, is now enlisted for a more targeted mission: to deliver this pollen directly to the waiting ovule. When a pollen grain lands on its target, it does not need a film of water. It grows a tiny tube, a microscopic tunnel that burrows through the female tissues, delivering its genetic payload directly to the heart of the egg. It is a moment of fertilization that is entirely independent of the rain or the dew. It is reproduction liberated from the swamp. After this moment of fertilization, the ovule transforms. It develops into a seed. Think of what a seed truly is. At its heart lies the embryo, a miniature, dormant plant, a complete blueprint for a future tree. Surrounding this embryo is a food supply, a packed lunch of starches and proteins to fuel its first days of growth. And encasing it all is a tough, protective seed coat, a shield against drying out, against being eaten, against the harshness of the outside world. The seed is a time capsule. It is a spaceship. It is a promise. It contains everything the next generation needs to begin life, all wrapped up in a single, durable, portable package. The parent plant can now drop its seeds to the ground, or entrust them to the wind, and they can wait. They can lie dormant through a dry season, or for years, sleeping, until the conditions are just right for them to awaken. When they do germinate, they have their own starting fuel, allowing their first roots to burrow and their first leaves to unfurl. without the desperate, immediate need for perfect conditions that a spore required. Now, plants could truly march inland. They could climb the dry mountain slopes. They could colonize the arid plains. The seed was their ticket to the entire continent. As the seed ferns perfected this strategy, a new kind of animal was embarking on a parallel journey. Among the early amphibian-like tetrapods, a new lineage was emerging. These were the first reptiles. They looked, at first, much like their amphibian cousins, small, lizard-like creatures scuttling after insects in the forest undergrowth. But they, too, carried a secret. A reproductive miracle was unfolding inside them. They evolved the amniotic egg. Hold one in your mind. It is, in its own way, as profound as a star. On the outside, a protective shell, sometimes leathery, sometimes hard, but always porous enough to allow for the gentle exchange of gases. This shell is the first line of defense against the drying air and physical harm. It is the fortress wall. But the true genius is on the inside. Within the shell, the embryo does not float in a simple blob of yolk. It floats within a series of brilliant, nested membranes. There is the amnion, a fluid-filled sac that surrounds the embryo directly. This is the private pond, the personal ocean. It is the evolutionary memory of water, made portable. The embryo develops in a buoyant, watery world, safe from dehydration and shock, no matter how dry the outside world becomes. Then there is the yolk sac, the packed lunch, attached to the embryo's belly, providing all the rich food it will need for its development. There is the allantois, another sac that acts as a storage container for the embryo's waste products and also serves as a respiratory surface, exchanging gas with the outside world through the shell. And finally, the chorion, a membrane that surrounds all the others, controlling the passage of water and gas. The amniotic egg is a self-contained life support system. It is a private world, a nursery, and a sewer, all in one. It is the animal equivalent of the seed. It severed the last tie to the water. The reptiles no longer needed to return to the ancestral pond to lay their eggs. They could lay their clutch in a shallow nest of soil, under a rotting log, deep in the heart of the continent, and trust that their shelled promise would protect their young. This was the key that unlocked the rest of the planet. Freed from the tyranny of the swamp, the reptiles began to radiate out, to explore and conquer the new lands opened up by the seed-bearing plants. Their skin, too, evolved, becoming tougher, scalier, and more waterproof, reducing their reliance on environmental moisture. The Paleozoic world was being remade. The old guard, the giant amphibians, and the spore-bearing forest giants were now confined to the shrinking wetlands. The future belonged to the new pioneers, the seed plants, and the reptiles. A quieter, drier, more resilient kind of life was beginning to spread across the vast, unified landmass of Pangaea. A silent partnership between the seed and the shell, poised to inherit the earth and to give rise to a new age of giants. Section 9. A symphony of giant wings. The seed has been planted, the shelled egg has been laid. The future is written in these small, resilient packages, a future of dry highlands and vast, open continents. But do not turn your gaze to that future just yet. For before the new world could be born, the old world, the world of the great swamps, was destined to have its most spectacular, most extravagant, and most terrifying hour. Let your mind settle into the heart of the Carboniferous period. 300 million years ago, the forests you have witnessed are now at their absolute zenith. They have spread to cover vast swathes of the planet in a single, unbroken swampy jungle. And these forests have been breathing. For millions of years, they have been performing their quiet alchemy, drawing down carbon dioxide and pouring out oxygen. The decomposers, still struggling to break down the tough wood, have not been able to keep pace. The planet's carbon cycle is gloriously, dangerously out of balance. The result is the air itself. Breathe it in your imagination. It is heavy, thick, and electric. The concentration of oxygen is not the 21% we know today. It is 30%, perhaps even soaring to 35%. This is not just air. It is a fuel, a draft of pure energy. It sharpens the senses, quickens the metabolism. But it also makes the world a tinderbox, where a single lightning strike could ignite a wildfire of unimaginable scale. The world is living in a fever dream of its own making. And this potent, supercharged air held a special gift for the planet's first flyers and crawlers, the arthropods. It offered them the freedom of scale. Remember the breathing system of an insect, the tracheae, those tiny, passive tubes that carry air directly to their tissues. In our world, the low concentration of oxygen means this system is only efficient over very short distances. It puts a physical limit on how large an insect's body can be. But in the oxygen-rich air of the Carboniferous, this limitation was lifted. The passive diffusion of oxygen was so efficient, so powerful, that it could penetrate deep into a much larger body. It was like turning up the pressure in a global pipeline. The governor was removed. The age of giants had arrived. Look up. Through the dense canopy of the scale trees, something blots out the green light. The air is filled with a sound it has never known before. Not a whisper, but a deep, rhythmic, leathery thrumming. This is the sound of Meganeura, the giant dragonfly. But to call it a dragonfly is to undersell its majesty and its terror. This is a creature with the wingspan of an eagle. Its two sets of wings, shimmering with iridescent colors, beat the thick air into submission. Its body is a long, armored spear. Its head is a helmet of enormous, kaleidoscopic compound eyes, capable of seeing the world in a mosaic of stunning detail. It is the apex predator of the air. It hangs motionless for a moment, a living jewel suspended in the humid atmosphere, and then it moves. It is not the flitting dance of a modern dragonfly. It is a bolt of living lightning. It dives, its basket-like legs extended, to snatch a smaller flying insect, or perhaps even a small amphibian from a branch. It is the king of this aerial kingdom, a symphony of terror and beauty written in chitin and wing. Now lower your gaze to the forest floor. The deep, damp carpet of fallen fronds and rotting logs is not still. It is moving. A percussive, rustling wave is approaching, a sound like 100 pairs of boots marching through dry leaves. And then it emerges from the gloom. Arthropleura, the giant millipede. It is the largest land invertebrate of all time. As long as a car, as wide as a man. It is a living train of overlapping, armored plates, propelled by a river of hundreds of legs flowing underneath its body. But there is no malice in this giant. It is not a predator. It is a gentle, titanic gardener. It moves slowly, purposefully, its great antennae sweeping the ground before it, its simple mouthparts munching on the endless bounty of rotting plant matter. It is a mobile compost heap, a key engine in this strange, slow-to-decay ecosystem. To stand in its path would be like standing before a slow-moving freight train, a creature so immense its very existence feels like a violation of the laws of nature. It is a testament to what life can achieve when the air itself feeds its ambition. And they are everywhere. The forest is humming, buzzing, and crawling with life on a scale that is hard to comprehend. Cockroaches the size of your hand scuttle over the bark of the giant calamites. Spiders with leg spans as wide as a dinner plate build their webs in the shadows. A bewildering variety of the first winged insects fill the air, their evolutionary experiments in flight just beginning. Some have 3 pairs of wings, some have strange, sail-like structures on their backs. It is a world of buzzing, clicking, and crawling, a symphony of arthropods. This world belongs to them, but they are not entirely alone. In the dark, stagnant pools, the vertebrates are also reaching their own gigantic proportions. The age of amphibians is in full force. Creatures like Ariops, a 6-foot-long behemoth, lie in wait. It has the build of a crocodile and the skin of a frog, a massive, flat head armed with a formidable array of sharp teeth. It lies half-submerged, its eyes just breaking the surface, a lurking guardian of the swamp. It is a predator of fish, but it would not hesitate to snatch a careless giant dragonfly that dipped too close to the water's surface, or even a small, unwary reptile on the shore. This is a world in overdrive, a hothouse of life, fueled by an atmosphere that borders on explosive. The sheer biomass, the weight of living things in these forests, is greater than anything the planet has seen before or since. The cycle of life and death is happening on a monumental scale, but the decay is incomplete. With every giant tree that falls and fails to rot, with every spore that settles into the mire, the planet is burying its carbon, banking the sunlight of a million yesterdays. It is a gilded age, but it cannot last. The very conditions that allow for this spectacular gigantism, high oxygen, the warm climate, the endless swamps, are inherently unstable. The climate is beginning a slow, inexorable shift. The continents are grinding together, pushing up mountain ranges, creating vast, dry interiors where the swamp forests cannot follow. And in the shadows, the small, unassuming creatures are waiting. The reptiles, with their waterproof skin and their revolutionary amniotic egg, and the seed ferns, with their patient, durable seeds. They are the heralds of a new, drier, and more resilient world. This spectacular, terrifying, beautiful symphony of giant wings and crawling armor is the final, glorious crescendo of the Paleozoic era's first chapter. Section 10. Echoes in a Modern World. The fever dream of the Carboniferous, with its supercharged air and its legion of giants, could not last forever. It was too beautiful, too extreme, a fleeting moment of planetary excess. As you rest here at the edge of that ancient time, you can feel the world beginning to change. The slow, inexorable dance of the continents continues. The great landmasses have finally ground together to form the supercontinent of Pangaea, a single immense world island stretching from pole to pole. This geological union had profound consequences. It pushed up vast mountain ranges, casting long-range shadows that starved the interior of moisture. The endless swamps began to retreat, shrinking back to the coastlines, their era of dominance coming to a close. The climate, once uniformly warm and wet, grew harsher, more seasonal, with vast tracts of the continent becoming arid and dry. The world was changing its mind. The oxygen levels began to fall from their dizzying heights, and the thick, humid air started to thin. For the giants, this was a death sentence. The Meganeura found its powerful flight harder to sustain in the thinner air. The Arthropleura found its simple breathing system could no longer power its immense body. The great amphibians found their swamps disappearing, leaving them stranded. The spectacular world of the coal forests was fading like a dream upon waking. But this was not an ending. It was a changing of the guard. The quiet, unassuming heroes of our last chapter, the reptiles and the seed plants, were perfectly adapted for this new, challenging world. Their moment had come. The seed, with its patient, self-contained promise, could now travel across these vast, dry plains, waiting for the brief, seasonal rains to sprout. The conifer, the cycad, the ginkgo, these tough, resilient gymnosperms began to form the new forests, forests of a different character, more open, more stark, built for survival. And following them went the reptiles. With their waterproof skin and their revolutionary amniotic egg, the dry interior of Pangaea was not a barrier but an open road. They radiated out, diversifying into a bewildering array of forms that would ultimately lead to the age of dinosaurs. They were the inheritors, the children of a drier, harder world. This transition culminated in the most profound crisis life on Earth has ever faced: the Permian-Triassic extinction, the Great Dying. A cataclysm, likely driven by volcanic activity on an unimaginable scale, that wiped out over 90% of all marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrate species. It was a planetary reset, a fire that swept through the global ecosystem. And yet, life endured. The adaptations that had been slowly developing: the seed, the shelled egg, the waterproof skin, were the very things that allowed life to pass through the crucible and emerge on the other side. The world that was born from that great silence was a new world, a world that belongs, in a way, more to us than to the ancient swamp kings. And it is here, in our modern world, that the echoes of this entire silent invasion still resonate, all around you, and even within you. This ancient story is not locked away in the fossil record. It is the ground beneath your feet, the air you are breathing now, and the very architecture of your own body. Feel, for a moment, the idea of soil. When you walk barefoot on cool grass, or run your hands through the dark, rich earth of a garden, you are connecting with a legacy that began 470 million years ago. You are feeling the work of those first, tenacious mosses whose acidic breath first dissolved the barren rock. You are touching the legacy of the deep, powerful roots of Archaeopteryx that first plowed the sterile land, and the endless, patient rain of leaves from the first forests. The scent of rain on dry ground, that beautiful smell we call petrichor, is the scent of that ancient pact, the aroma of life and rock meeting in a humid embrace. The soil is not just dirt. It is a library of time, a testament to the slow greening of a planet. Now take a slow, deep breath. Feel the air enter your lungs. Feel your chest rise and fall. That simple, involuntary act is a conversation with the Carboniferous. The oxygen that is now fueling your every cell, powering your thoughts as you listen to these words, is a gift from those primeval forests. They transformed a thin, alien atmosphere into the rich, breathable air that sustains all complex animal life today. Your lungs, with their vast, branching surface area, are perfectly tuned to drink from this invisible, 300-million-year-old river. Every breath is an echo. Consider the energy that lights your room or powers the device you are listening on. If it comes from coal or natural gas, you are, in this very moment, being touched by the ghost of a lepidodendron tree. You are summoning the sunlight that fell on its leaves 300 million years ago. We have built our civilization by burning down a fossilized forest, releasing the ancient, buried carbon back into the sky. We are living, quite literally, on the borrowed energy of this silent invasion's most extravagant chapter. But the most profound echo is the one within you. Straighten your arm. Wiggle your fingers. The bones you feel moving under your skin, the single bone in your upper arm, the two in your forearm, the cluster in your wrist, the branching digits, this is not a new design. This is the ancient architecture of the lobe-finned fish, the bony structure of the fin it used to prop itself up on the muddy bottom of a Devonian swamp. Your arm is a repurposed fin. Your hand is a tool that began its journey as a paddle. And the story is deeper still. For 9 months you floated. You developed not in the dry air, but in a warm, watery world, protected and cushioned within an amniotic sac. You were, for a time, a creature of the sea, living out the most ancient part of your evolutionary history in a private, portable ocean. You are a child of the amniotic egg, a direct inheritor of the shelled promise that allowed life to finally turn its back on the pond and walk into the heart of the continents. The silent invasion was never truly silent. It was a symphony of creation, played out over hundreds of millions of years. It was the soft hiss of acid on rock, the rustle of the first roots exploring the new soil, the slow-motion creak of the first trees reaching for the sun, the soft, wet slap of the first amphibians on mud, and the leathery thrum of giant wings in a supercharged sky. It was not a war of conquest, but a slow, patient act of homemaking. The continents were not defeated. They were awakened. Life did not simply arrive upon the land. It grew out of it, and in doing so, transformed it into the living, breathing, beautiful world we know. This story is the story of how our planet became itself. And you, resting here, are not just an observer of this story. You are its living proof. The echoes are in your bones, in your breath, in the very ground that holds you. And so, our long journey through deep time comes to a gentle close. We have walked the barren plains of an empty world and stood in the emerald twilight of the first forests. We have felt the profound silence, and we have heard the first faint sounds of life on land. These ancient echoes are all around us, a quiet hum beneath the noise of our own world. Let them be a source of comfort now, a reminder of your deep, unbreakable connection to the entire story of life. The planet is breathing, and so are you. Let your breath slow down, matching the deep, ancient rhythm of the earth itself. The story is finished, but its peace remains with you. Now drift away on these quiet thoughts. There is nothing more to do, nothing more to see. Just the soft, dark, and peaceful space of your own rest. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with quiet wonder.